Hello, Tom Stapleton here from the Wakefield Community Access Television Station. And today we have a special guest, Senator Jason Lewis, who is with us about a monthly thing, but we're a little bit behind now, so we've got a little catching up to do for you. Congratulations, and nice to see you again.
Thank you, Tom, and it's always good to be back with you.
And I know I'm going to date the show a little bit here, but I know yesterday was Father's Day, and I trust you had nothing to do on Father's Day. Is that right?
Well, it was a nice day.
Yeah.
I did get to relax a bit. My wife is from St. Louis, actually, and my in-laws were visiting from St. Louis, so we got to spend some time with them, which was nice.
Oh, that's good. A nice day. Well, let's get right to it. Educational funding. Educational funding is always a concern for the state government. What recent developments can you share that would help ease the funding burdens and put the towns and cities at risk?
Yeah, so education and how we fund our public schools, K through 12, is probably one of the most important things that that we do in both the town government and in state government. And the state provides what's known as Chapter 70 aid, which is the state funding for our public schools, and that's about close to $5 billion a year. It's it's actually the second biggest part of the state budget. The biggest is the Medicaid program, Mass Health, but Chapter 70 K through 12 is the second biggest. The problem is that the whole formula and how we fund public schools was set up in 1993 when we had the Education Reform Act. And it was quite innovative at the time. We were one of the first states to really create a real strong mechanism for how to make sure every school district gets the resources it needs. But in recent years, it has not been keeping up with all of the demands that are placed on our schools. Things like healthcare costs, which have gone through the, gone up a lot. More students that need special education services. New technology. Back in 1993, we obviously didn't even have the internet. So I've been one of my top priorities that I've been in the legislature is to update and reform the school funding formula to make sure it accurately captures what our schools really need. And several years ago, I filed legislation, and this was actually when I was still a state representative, that created a bipartisan blue ribbon commission that looked really hard at this issue, took testimony from people, stakeholders all over the state. And they came out with their recommendations. It was called the Foundation Budget Review Commission. And it was what we expected, all the changes we need to make to the formula. So then my priority since then, since I've been in the state Senate, is to get those recommendations implemented into law so we can actually change the formula and begin to provide higher levels of funding to Wakefield schools and all of our public schools to meet their needs. And the very exciting news is that just last month in May, we're taping the show here in June, the state Senate took up the bill and unanimously passed it, bipartisan basis, to implement those recommendations of this prior commission to update the school funding formula. So that's a very big step forward in education in the state. The bill still has to pass the House of Representatives, and then the governor would have to support it. But there's a lot of momentum now to move that along.
All right. That's good to hear. I've made some good inroads there, I should say.
Yes.
On that issue. Now, you had mentioned public health care. You serve as the chair of the Public Health Committee. What have you been able to accomplish in the public health care during your time in the legislature? Yeah,
so that's, I serve on the Senate leadership team, so I do get the opportunity to influence and have a say in the Senate's agenda. And then, in addition, I have responsibilities as chair of the Labor Committee and as chair of the Public Health Committee. And in my role as chair of the Public Health Committee, we've been working on a range of different issues, but one in particular that I know is very near and dear to my heart, and I know is very important here locally in Wakefield, is trying to help educate our young people, our middle school and high school students, and prevent them from using alcohol, tobacco, vaping, marijuana, opioids, et cetera. Because we know from a lot of research that if you can delay usage of any of these substances until you get older, you are far less likely to develop any kind of health problems. You're far less likely to develop an addiction. So anything we can do to kind of help our young people to be safe. One key challenge we're facing right now, as you know, we've talked about this, is vaping, which is electronic cigarettes. And unfortunately, a lot of our young people, and sometimes parents as well, don't understand that these are not safe. They contain nicotine, just like regular cigarettes do. They're very addictive, and there's a lot of evidence that they can be very harmful to your health, just like regular cigarettes. So we are working hard to pass legislation, and I'm pleased to tell you that the Senate will be taking up this bill next week. And this legislation, which I've long championed and I helped write, will do two main things. It will raise the legal age for people to purchase tobacco products, including vaping products, to 21. So rather than being 18, it'll be 21, which is actually the case in Wakefield already, thanks to the strong rules of the local Board of Health. But we want to make that true statewide. And that's because it gets these products out of high school social networks, and it makes it less likely that young people will start vaping or using tobacco. And then the second thing the bill does is it includes vaping in the definition of tobacco, so that in schools, in restaurants, in workplaces, it'll be clear that if you can't smoke cigarettes, you also can't be vaping, and that'll help our schools to make sure they have clear policies against any kind of tobacco use, including vaping on school premises. So I'm very looking forward to passing that bill and sending it to the governor's desk.
When that bill passes, does that mean like restaurants and so on will have to honor that?
They will absolutely, yes. Basically, we have a smoke-free workplace law passed about 10 years ago. And so now we would essentially be adding vaping into that law. So wherever you can't smoke cigarettes or cigars, you would now also not be allowed to vape. And that's common sense, because I don't want to be sitting next to someone who's vaping right here. There's all kinds of chemicals in there. We don't even fully know. These products aren't fully regulated by the FDA, so it's, if somebody wants to vape, that's their choice. They should be allowed to do that. And for some adults, it is a way to stop smoking cigarettes, which might be somewhat better for their health. But that doesn't mean we should be doing it in public places.
Now, on the budget, you might have touched upon this, but with the state budget it's in session now, and they've been in there for a while. What can Massachusetts citizens expect to see to come out of Beacon Hill, and what would you like to see take place? You may have touched upon that earlier.
Yeah, we talked a bit about the education piece of it. So that's the most important piece of legislation that we work on each year, and that's the state budget. And we, under our state law, we have to have a balanced budget every year. It's not like the federal government where we can borrow money and we can't print money, so it has to be balanced. So we have to look at the revenues that are going to be coming in from taxes or fees or from the federal government, and then we have to make our decisions as to how we would spend that between K through 12 education, higher education, healthcare, the MBTA, mental health care, environment, you name it. So that budget process actually starts in January and it concludes now here in June. So we're right near the end. We will be finalizing the budget very soon, sending it to Governor Baker. So I prioritize, just like I do every year, local aid, making sure our cities and towns get as much as they can for the public safety purposes, libraries, senior centers, services, things like that, and of course our schools. And then also I was able to secure an earmark for the town of Wakefield, which would be $100,000 to help with the continued renovation of the Albion Cultural Exchange.
Oh, really? Yeah, that's right.
Which is a wonderful facility, of course, that's creating a real arts hub for downtown Wakefield. It's great for the cultural scene. It's great for helping revitalize, Main Street, which has been a key focus for the town and for myself and the legislative delegation working with the town to kind of encourage, more pedestrian shoppers, more restaurants, more new businesses. We're really working on that. So the cultural exchange is a key part of that. So this funding will help with the continued renovation efforts there. And we're looking forward to that hopefully being in the final budget.
Very good. Very good. Now, on the ballot, can you discuss your viewpoints on two ballot initiatives voters can expect to see in November 2018 one, Massachusetts Income Tax and for Education and Transportation Initiative, and the Massachusetts General Identity Anti-Discrimination Veto Referendum.
Yes, so both big issues, and the first one is the so-called Millionaires tax, which would propose to assess an additional 4% income tax on people that have an income above $1 million a year. So it wouldn't affect that many people. I don't think you or I would be affected by it.
I'm all set.
We're all set. So you'd have to earn more than $1 million a year, and then on the income above $1 million a year, you would be charged the additional 4%. That's the so-called millionaires tax. There is a group called the Raise Up Coalition that's been working on this for many years. It has gone through a whole process. The legislature had to weigh in on it actually twice. And we just got some news, which is I'm disappointed about, literally right before I came on the show with you today. The millionaires tax that was challenged by some business groups that thought it didn't belong on the ballot, that it wasn't constitutional. So they challenged it. That challenge was heard by the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court back in February, and they've been deliberating on it ever since, and the decision just came out this morning, and they said it will not be on the ballot. So they said it does not meet the rules, the constitutional rules for an amendment, because this is an actual amendment to the state constitution. Which, by the way, is the oldest written constitution anywhere in the world still in use today, is the Massachusetts State Constitution. Isn't that something? So, and this millionaires tax would be an amendment to the Constitution, just the way it has to be written. But unfortunately, they've now ruled it won't be on the ballot. So voters won't get to weigh in on it in November. And I'm sure the advocates and the legislators who support it will be looking at other ways to pursue this, going forward.
I was just going to say that it hasn't ended here, I'm sure.
No, it hasn't ended. And, it's a setback. And the reason it's not that I'm, eager to tax millionaires more. It's not that. It's because we desperately need additional revenue for a number of things. But first and foremost, what we talked about earlier, which is how to fund our public schools to the level that they need, which is key to our future of our young people and our economy and our communities. And this money from the millionaires tax would have been used for education and for transportation. And I don't need to tell you, we need to invest in the MBTA as well to have a better and reliable public transportation system. The commuter rail is hugely important to Wakefield and the whole region. So unfortunately, this will not be giving us new revenue for that right now, but we'll keep working on it. The other question you mentioned, which will definitely be on the ballot, is an effort to repeal a law that we passed a few years ago, that Governor Baker signed into law, which basically provides protections for transgender people. So transgender people have faced a lot of discrimination and harassment. They have among the highest suicide rates of any group, very marginalized in our communities. And we passed this legislation to ensure that they would not be discriminated against and that they would be protected in employment, in housing, and in public accommodations. Unfortunately, this ballot question, there's a group that wants to repeal that law, and they've gone to the ballot. So I'm certainly going to be working to educate people and ask them to hopefully not repeal the law and to keep it in place.
A lot of work there.
Yes.
Big issue.
Yes, there's a lot of work to be done there because right now the polling shows that there is a majority of people who want to keep the law and not repeal it, but it's pretty close. So, but I'm hopeful as more people learn about what the law does and why it's important, and it's important for public safety and civil rights. That people will hopefully agree that it's a good law and we should keep it.
Gun safety laws. What measures?
Wow, you're not picking any big, weighty topics today, Tom.
No, we're just well, you'll get your chance. What measures are you and other Massachusetts legislators taking to ensure responsible gun ownership and safety in the Commonwealth? Yep,
another very important issue, of course, and we've all been just devastated and saddened by the ongoing, shootings. And not just school shootings, by the way. There's people always focus on school shootings, understandably, but there's far more shootings going on, in our communities every day. where very often it's young people gunning down other young people, So we do have to do a lot more to deal with it. Fortunately, in Massachusetts, we have in place already essentially all the gun laws, the gun safety laws that most people talk about, when they talk about having strong background checks to make sure that people, can own a gun and be trusted with it, you handle it safely. We don't allow assault weapons, in Massachusetts. We don't allow high caliber, large magazines. There's a limit on how many bullets per magazine. We have very rigorous processes for training on gun safety and how you have to lock up your guns, things like that. So we've had those in place. And by the way, we actually have the lowest rate of gun violence of any state. And,
well, that's good to hear. I
that's
did not
good
know
to hear.
that.
We have we still have too high a rate of
Yeah.
gun violence, but it's lower than other states. And most people think that's partially, at least, due to the strong, gun safety laws we have. And by the way, we still fully respect Second Amendment rights. People who do want to own firearms can certainly own them, use them, but they just have to follow the law. And anyway, so there was an issue that was raised about what about if somebody is having, a mental health crisis and they are an imminent danger to themselves, committing suicide, or a danger to other people, and they own firearms. So we just passed legislation, and it's on the governor's desk. I don't think he's signed it yet, but I expect he'll sign it. It's called the Red Flag Law, or it's also known as Extreme Risk Protective Orders, or ERPO for short. And so that is basically creates a process whereby the police chief, so here in Wakefield, Chief Smith, by the way, he's a strong supporter of this bill, would have a legal process going through a court, a judge, if somebody is an imminent risk to themselves or others, where you could temporarily remove their weapons. And so that's, I think is reasonable and sensible.
Yeah.
And that did pass the House and Senate, and we do expect Governor Baker to sign that shortly. And a number of other states have taken similar measures.
Well, that's good information. Let's switch to the state budget amount now. In April, the House and Ways and Means Committee released a proposed budget of $40.9 billion, an increase of 3.1%. Where would that 3.1% be used, and how would it be paid for?
So this is related to the discussion I think we had about the budget before, somewhat. As I mentioned, the process starts in January. The governor actually first comes out with what he proposes. Then the House of Representatives does their version of the budget. So Representatives Broder and Wong, worked on that with their colleagues. And then the Senate, we debated and passed our version in May. And now that's what's being reconciled between the House and the Senate to get a final budget to the governor. So it takes about 6 months. But you're right, the total increase is about 3%, a little more than 3%. And mostly that does reflect, generally increases in costs. Healthcare costs keep going up, some increase in worker salaries. So it's not really a lot of new money for certainly any new initiatives. But the economy is very strong right now, and we have record low unemployment, so that is helping to bring in some additional revenues. One of the things we are also trying to do is we want to rebuild our state's rainy day fund. It's also called the stabilization fund, because invariably we're going to hit a recession again at some point, and then we need to be able to rely on our rainy day fund, to maintain important programs and services. So we are trying to also make sure we're rebuilding that at the same time that we're trying to increase funding for local aid for our cities and towns, K through 12 education. We talked about the Chapter 70 money. Also, we're really focused on trying to improve treatment for mental health and substance abuse as well, the opioid crisis, which we're fighting. So that's very important. And certainly public transportation, where there's a lot of investment, going into the T, and trying to, upgrade the infrastructure and make it more reliable.
Affordable housing, a constant issue not only in the Commonwealth but all over the country. What steps are the legislators taking to ensure that affordable housing remains available for citizens who need it?
Yeah, we're very concerned about this issue because You know, on the one hand, the greater Boston area is really booming economically. There's been a lot of businesses, you know, starting here and growing here. There's a lot of jobs that are being created, which is great. The downside is it is really driving up prices in the housing market and in the rental market as well. And that makes it really hard for, you know, for young families to live here. It makes it hard for seniors to stay here in the community, and we're very concerned about that. And we think if we don't find a way to generate more housing, particularly affordable housing for middle and lower income, you know, it's going to, over time, it's going to reduce it's going to hurt the economy and reduce, you know, the growth in this area that we can sustain. So we're doing a number of things. We recently passed a major, what's called a housing bond bill, and that was bipartisan. And that bill is going to provide almost close to $2 billion in new investment in housing in general. So it's lots of different programs, you know, that provide both direct funding for housing, like, for example, our housing authorities and some low-income housing programs, and also provides incentives to the private sector to build more housing, and including in that affordable housing. So that's really good. The governor supported that as well, and that's, you know, going to be playing out over the next five plus years. In addition to that, we're also working on legislation. This gets a little more controversial. That could make some changes to how we manage zoning and land use, and you know, this is where you get into conflicts between sort of local control and state. So we're trying to strike the right balance, because we do, I mean, I believe strongly we should still, you know, leave it mostly up to our, you know, the town of Wakefield to decide, you know, how to manage its housing stock and its land, you know, land use decisions. At the same time, we do have to make sure that everybody is part of the chipping in to, you know, to help create more housing stock. So, for example, one of the changes we're looking at that the governor has actually proposed, when you go into town meeting, like you go into Wakefield town meeting and you want to make a change to the zoning, it requires a 2/3 vote. So it's a pretty high bar. So this change would say it would be good enough to get just a majority vote in order to change zoning rules. So that's a change we're considering. So basically would make it a little bit easier for Wakefield and other towns that want to make some changes to zoning in order to, you know, have new types of housing or potentially more dense housing in, like, the town center, to be able to do that. So we're looking at that and a range of other ideas as well that would help to hopefully generally more incentivize housing creation.
Well, we have a few more minutes. Is there something that you would really like to dive into? Because you've given me all this time. Now it's your turn. Well,
I wanted to mention something else I've been spending a lot of time on. We talked about my role as the Public Health Committee chair and, you know, some of that work. I mentioned I also have another responsibility in the legislature, which is I chair the Labor Committee.
Okay.
And actually my co-chair, because most committees are joint between the House and Senate, you know, we work together. So I'm the chair for the Senate. The chair for the House side is Representative Paul Broder, who I'm sure everyone knows represents part of Wakefield. So we work together very closely. There's a couple very big public policy issues that we have responsibility for in that committee. One of them is the minimum wage, and another one is so-called paid family leave. Okay. And so those are two issues that Representative Broder and I have been working on for a long time now, working with activists who are trying to increase the minimum wage and create paid family leave, as well as working with the business community, you know, who has some concerns about those policies and how they get implemented. And I guess we're sitting here on Monday. I'm not sure what the date is today.
18th.
The June 18th?
Yeah.
So what I would say is stay tuned.
Yeah.
I think you may see just later this week some big news on this front. So you heard it from me first, although I can't tell you exactly the details. But
you had me all going there.
In a couple days, I think you'll see some big news about impacting both the minimum wage here in Massachusetts. Currently, the minimum wage is $11 an hour, and there's discussions about potentially raising that to $15 an hour in overtime, and then also enabling people to be able to take leave when they have the birth of a child, or if they have a serious illness, you know, and being able to get at least partially paid while they're taking leave. Because currently, unless your employer is generous enough to provide it, most people have to take unpaid leave. And you know, that's fine if you're wealthy, but you know, if you're not, you can't afford to take leave if you're not being paid. So, you know, we hear very sad stories of, you know, parents who aren't able to take off time with a new baby. You know, they have to go right back to work, or they have a very ill child or spouse, and they also can't even take time off work to care for them. So it's really something that is important, you know, for our families.
Is all that information is what's coming?
Yes, coming later
down
this
the road,
week.
later
Yeah,
this,
well, remember, you and I were talking, we're
Yeah.
nearing the end of the legislative session, so a lot of issues that we've been working on now since really early last year are now kind of coming to a head and hopefully getting resolved in the coming weeks. So stay tuned on that front.
Well, that's good. That's good to hear. We have about 2 minutes left. Do you want to touch on anything that might be important? I mean, everything you say is important, but I don't know if I'm missing anything.
You know, I'll use the opportunity to say, you know, I love representing the town of Wakefield, and you know, and being the state senator for this district.
How many years now?
It's been about 4 years
4
now
years.
that I've had the privilege of
Yeah.
you know, being the state senator, and it's been great to work with you know, Steve Mayo and the town council and the school committee and all the wonderful community groups here in town. This year is an election year, and I'm going to be seeking re-election. There's a Democratic primary actually on, it's going to be the day after Labor Day, which is very unusual, but that's when it is this year, so that's September. And the regular general election is November, the same time we're going to vote for governor and for the ballot questions and Senator Warren. So also, in addition to my legislative work, I'm also on the campaign trail and knocking on doors and talking to voters and getting feedback, and I look forward to that, you know, ongoing through the summer.
Well, that sounds like a pretty busy schedule there, and you know, there's no rest for the weary. But you've done
Not right now.
You've done a great job. I mean, from the time that I've known you, we've always, you know, seen that you've been out there, busy, doing everything you possibly can. So I wish you luck on that one. But
thank you very much, Tom. Appreciate the time with you.
well, with that, I guess we're running right where we should be now, so we can say everything. But I hope the rest of the summer works out for you, and enjoy it. But thanks very much for coming here.
You too. Have a great summer.
All righty.